anyone on the panel who would like to deal with that question? There are two questions. Why not a regional approach rather than a country or party approach on the issue of Zimbabwe? Tozi, you want to try that? Tozi? In the meantime, let me get to Shepherd. Shepherd, can you come in, Shepherd? Okay, Tozi?
Yeah. No, I was saying Jessica is raising the point about that I raised much earlier, that you see, this was a party-to-party relationship or dialogue, which is really a body-body kind of relationship, because the point I think Eleanor and Militsi made this point earlier, that these are parties that were friends during the liberation struggle. So the anti-colonial struggle, now they remain loyal to each other, protective of each other. It was the desire of the ANC that ZANU-PF remains in power forever, for as long as it lives. In the same way that some leaders in South Africa would say that we will rule until Jesus comes. So regardless of what, how that government is ruling and how negative its impact is on its citizens, there's the loyalty of the past reigns supreme in terms of these parties of liberation. So but when it comes to SADC, my worry is that I'm not so sure whether it's SADC or AU, whether it has any effect, its intervention will have any effect. Because again, question is, does the peer review or has the peer review had any impact in changing the way African governments behave? My view is that they don't. So let's come back to what Eleanor was talking about, civil society. Now, civil society, personally, I support civil society very much, but civil society act on issue base. They are not just going to come to Zimbabwe and say, we want ZANU-PF to move out or Mnangagwa to be removed. They're going to pick up on issues. The issue of civil rights, the arrest of people, the suppression of human rights, and the victimization of the press and political opposition, it's an issue that civil society can pick up on. But we also need to identify what are the areas of vulnerability of the government of Zimbabwe. What issues can civil society pick up on so that they mobilize one another around those issues, whether it's regional or South Africa and Zimbabweans in South Africa. At the moment, I don't find that these issues are identified and picked up and highlighted strongly. I mean, this violation of human rights issue is a very serious issue, which I think can be picked up by both South Africans and Zimbabweans in South Africa and other national groups. So yes, I think that's, for me, how we should look at this thing. That we will find solution of a state to state, I don't see any possibility of getting any positive results out of that.
Well, we'll deal with the second question, Jessica, later on. How did they try? Well, the ANC was here for a whole day, met with ZANU-PF, and they say to have put a number of issues on the agenda, and that the dialogue continues from what our understanding. But let me call Shepherd. Shepherd, your hand is up. Shepherd, please come in.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ibbo. I'm just going to raise a few issues and I'll pose a question. First of all, the issue of dialogue, yes, it's been happening. It's a very good move. But is it an intervention that the Zimbabwean government really cares about? I think it's very important for people to appreciate the nature of the beast that they're dealing with. Do they care? Pressure such as diplomatic pressure actually matters to a government that cares about its reputational standing. The Zimbabwean government, with all its shenanigans, doesn't seem to care. So what sort of pressure, what are the alternatives? What sort of pressure will the government of Zimbabwe actually perceive as pressure? Because with the current dialogues that are going on, they've had these dialogues. They know how to dance around them. They know how to parry the blows that come with those dialogues. So what are the other regional alternatives that can be put on the Zimbabwean government? Thank you.
Tendai, I want to deal with Shepard's question. Tendai Biti. And then I'll call on to Tony Rila after that. Tendai, what are the alternatives, if any? Unmute yourself, Tendai.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so Shepard makes very valid point that you are dealing with the rogue, cantankerous characters that they don't care at all. I mean, every single day, and this is not a metaphor. Every single day there's a predatory headline. Today it was doctors being conscripted. Yesterday they abducted Joanna Mamombe and put her in a mental institution. I mean, every single day. On Monday, we had a report from the NGOs, fantastic report that confirms what we've always been saying, that there's been systematic use of rape as a political weapon, the weaponization of rape, something unprecedented. Even apartheid in its worst form did not do that. So you are dealing with the rogues, you are dealing with the pure, undiluted thugs. So the point that Moleetsi makes, the point that Eleanor makes is fundamental. Number one, we need the agency of Zimbabweans to put pressure on the regime. The Constitution allows us to do that. The Constitution allows us to engage in civil disobedience. Let's boycott their businesses. Let's go on the streets, the kind of thing that in South Africa the UDF did in the fight against apartheid. The kind of thing we tried to do on the 31st of July, 2020. So Zimbabweans must provide the agency. We must confront the beast in the parameters allowed by our constitution. But we need a global advocacy. We need to build a universal movement against this regime. We did it with apartheid. A global advocacy program was built around apartheid, and the Zimbabwean Lives hashtag movement after the 31st of July showed that it can be, done. You had people that under ordinary circumstances would not know where Zimbabwe was on the map, coming to the fore, talking about Zimbabwe, tweeting about Zimbabwe. But as Eleanor says, it has to be coherent. There has to be a coherent demands. 30 years later, 40 years later, we need our own Harare Declaration, maybe call it the Soweto Declaration, on demands for change and reform in Zimbabwe, demands for change in protection of civil liberties in Zimbabwe, a Soweto Charter on protection on human and civil rights in Zimbabwe. The truth of the matter is that we're dealing with a securocratic state, the most complicated, the most sophisticated dictatorship on the African continent. Robert Mugabe went, but it doesn't change anything. Emerson Mnangagwa will go, it will not change anything. You are dealing with a sophisticated regime oiled by the massive resources of Zimbabwe, operating in 8 or so commanding heights of corruption, oiled by incestuous relationship with the Republic of China, Belarus, Russia, and so forth. They've been at it at a long time, and they will not go. They will not reform themselves out of power. We have to be disruptive. We have to find new, innovative ways of confronting them. Otherwise, there will be another 40 years of suffering. We will come and we'll go, and the crisis will remain the same. And that simply is not good enough. So we have to be disruptive, and we have to find convergence. We have to provide the agency, but the international community can and should help us as well.
Thanks, Tendai. Tony Rila, please. Tony.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, I've been listening in fascination. I thought the text today was to start thinking about some outcomes. And one of the things that struck me and some of us working here in Zimbabwe is that Zimbabwe actually is a regional problem. By all standards, objective criteria, Zimbabwe is about the 10th most fragile state in the world. Puts us in the category of places like Yemen, Sudan, etc., etc. And the point about fragile states is that they can be redeemed, but they can also fail. They go from fragility to failure. And I think some of us here would argue that Zimbabwe is perilously close to failure. It's isolated economically with no redemption. It's not the sanctions that are the problem. It's the fact that the factors that Tendai talks about, the mass corruption and the money laundering and everything else that goes on, precludes us from getting any foreign direct investment. So in this region, you're faced with the problem of a state that might actually collapse. And when it collapses, it's going to have effects within the region. Within a region in which there's a massively serious insurgency problem developing in Mozambique. So the region is, in a sense, in not dissimilar position to what was happening in the late 1970s. And in those situations, multilateralism is what happens. People get forced to the table. Now, I hear the pessimism about the South African government and the ANC, et cetera, but nonetheless, when countries get to this particular point and they can affect very seriously the countries around them, this is a case for multilateralism. So the way we frame this often is that South Africa has to do something about it, i.e. it has to directly engage. Well, South Africa needs to engage, but it also needs to engage bilaterally with the region, with the international community. That's what brings people to the table in the end. Now, this is not precluding civil society pressure, internal responses, but what I'm trying to suggest here is this is not one of these problems that we think, well, like some other countries, it'll drag on for another 20 years. I think the empirical evidence suggests that Zimbabwe does not have a lot of time. And if we don't do something about it, well, it's going to affect absolutely everyone else. And that's to place Zimbabwe in an emergency case. It's not just a bad country, which it is. It's a bad country heading for worse kinds of situations. And I think that's the key thing that I'm not hearing here, is a sense of urgency about what needs to be done. And I mean internally, regionally, and internationally. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Eleanor, please come in.
I think Max would like to say something.
Oh, welcome, Max.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairperson. A couple of things I'd like to point out. One is that the struggle in Zimbabwe has to be highlighted. We need everybody to know that Zimbabwe is not just a normal state. The conditions in Zimbabwe are worse than in many other parts of Africa. I'm not saying all parts are bad, but what I'm saying is that Zimbabwe has the potential to mobilize its own people, to mobilize international support, also because of the role that Zimbabweans have played in the struggle for freedom. And again, when they need this support, I think the world and all of us would be more than happy to contribute what we can in emphasizing the importance of democracy in Zimbabwe. We tend more often than not simply to take things for granted. For example, the discussions that we've been having today are important. I don't know how many other people outside this meeting would know about what is happening. We need to popularize the struggle in Zimbabwe. We need to popularize the anger of the people about the conditions that they live under. We need to make it a people's struggle as well, not just a struggle of the few who live in Zimbabwe, because we're all affected one way or the other by what happens in any African country. And Zimbabwe is a good example because they have been involved in many of the struggles in Africa themselves. And therefore, everybody would understand when they say, now we need your support in our struggle for democracy, for freedom. It should not be things that are kept secret. There's nothing secret about it. Nothing secret about fighting for freedom. It's quite right. Everybody should do that. So what I'm proposing is maybe a new strategy of how to deal with the issue of Zimbabwe. What needs to be done? Who needs to do what? Let it be an open thing that we are calling on people of the world to join in the struggle for freedom in this part of the world or in Zimbabwe or wherever, so that it is not left to die on its own. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Max. That's very nice. Refreshing. That's a Max Zulu. Nice, most refreshing to hear that. Onalina? Onalina?
Okay. Yeah, no, I still want to insist that, you know, the solutions going forward must be that the whole region of Southern Africa, civil society, is actually engaged as well, because there's a tendency not to see Zimbabwe as a problem, other than that, you know, there are neighbors who might be just wanting to come and get jobs from people. We need to start dialoguing, and I would be much more comfortable when that dialogue goes beyond the usual suspects of the liberation movement that have built links over time, to start engaging with others. The issue of violence, the issue of, you know, we talk about Zimbabwe as very highly militarized. Remember that Botswana was not terribly far from that in the last 12 years. And I don't know that we have actually come really out of the problem without actually exaggerating the seriousness of the Zimbabwe situation. But we have things in common here that we ought to be dialoguing about on a daily basis, so that it comes to the conscience of every citizen in Southern Africa to put pressure on their governments to start looking at things in a much more holistic manner than it being a Zimbabwe problem. We really have to go beyond the usual channels of communication, where it's ANC people, whether they are ANC as in NGOs dominated by the ruling parties of the former liberation movement. We really ought to broaden the discourse, because, as I said earlier, many of these things are problems that affect all of us to different degrees. And so if we have to solve them, let's solve them holistically by engaging everybody in the region. But the Zimbabweans have to be the agents, because we don't want to see a situation where international organizations, particularly Western ones, dominate because they are seen by people to have big purses and therefore come and boss us around. Let it be a Southern African issue, first and foremost, because we are neighbors, because we've been here before. During the anti-colonial struggles, during the settler colonial struggles, we've been together before. And so let's begin those dialogues. Let's begin to conscientize people to have many other voices speaking for Zimbabweans, speaking with their governments to say, what are you doing about the level of violence and rape that goes on against women in Zimbabwe? What are you doing about the lack of democratic governance in Zimbabwe? Because at the end of it all, at the end of the day, we are all affected. And therefore, we ought to be able to put pressure on our own governments to say, what are you doing to listen to the voice of Zimbabweans? So that would be, you know, until I see that, I would always feel that our states are captured anyway. And so if dialogues are kept between states and do not involve all citizens, the possibility of finding long-term sustainable resolution of problems will bandage over the problems but never solve the deep-rooted structural issues that give us the nature of the problems that we have in the region.
Thanks, Du. I remember your nickname, Du. Thanks very much. I have a question now. I have a written question from someone. Tendai, you briefly spoke about how international actors such as the People's Republic of China are providing succor to the ZANU-PF regime. I would like to find out from you and the other panelists and discussants whether engaging the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, directly could be one of the strategies used in finding new pathways to resolve the Zimbabwe situation. We'll begin with Tendai there, and maybe Tendai, and in answering that question, you could also sum up as we're coming to the end of the program. And then I'll have all panelists and discussants do likewise. Tendai?
Yes, so Zimbabwe has had a very unequal and uneven relationship with the Republic of China. And unfortunately, this relationship has been based on extraction. This relationship has been based on what under ordinary circumstances would call imperialism, neocolonization. That's what we would call it. The relationship has been very unequal. If you look at our resources, our commodities, let's start with diamonds. Zimbabwe between 2010 and 2016 lost $15 billion worth of diamonds. I used to be Minister of Finance. I ended up sounding like a broken record, complaining about the lack of accountability of Zimbabwe's mining companies vis-a-vis diamonds. But the dominant player in that sector has actually been the Chinese. There's a company called Anjin, which mines in the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe, which used to mine 2 million carats of diamonds per month in partnership with the Zimbabwean military. They were the biggest mine, actually running 7 mines, seven shafts in Marange, but they were not accountable. I could go to other contracts, construction of roads, the Wange South, the Kariba South power extension. What happened on Kariba is that both Zambia and Zimbabwe put 2 generators each on the north of the Kariba Dam and the south of the Kariba Dam. Zimbabwe paid like 3 times what Zambia paid for essentially the installation of the same generators. So I could write a book about the uneven and unequal relationship of China. I don't romanticize the same, but I also am aware of the fact that the Chinese government are not immune to the instability in Zimbabwe. And Chinese capital, state capital, is aware that a stable environment, economically, socially, is the best environment for the reproduction of its own capital and its own business and commercial interests in Zimbabwe that are huge anyway. So I think part of the disruption would be dialogue with the Chinese. I know from my time in government that each time that I went to China, and I went on 2 occasions, I would have dialogue and discussions with the Chinese Communist Party, and they were very clear that they wanted stability. One of the things that were viciously against was ZANU's miscued indigenization policy, which they later scrapped. They saw that as predation, that it had nothing to do with the empowerment of the people, and they used to say this openly, even in the presence of President Robert Mugabe. So I think that they should be approached because they share the same concerns. The difference is that they will not carry a megaphone. I think the difference is that they will not openly criticize any government, but I would support a move that they be engaged. So too, the Russians, the Indians, traditional countries that have not had anything to do with our diplomacy. But I need to emphasize that it's a domestic issue, it's a Zimbabwean challenge, it's an African challenge. So the backstops with us as Zimbabweans and as Africans.
And before you, as your closing remarks, would you say something as to how this South African intervention, South African mediation, South African engagement with the counterparts in Harare, how do you think it can move to a multilateral involving SADC, AU, and indeed, as you have just hinted, even BRICS and the Commonwealth as part of the discussion, as happened before in the history of Zimbabwe? We had Lancaster ourselves. Lancaster was very much mediated and organized by both regional and international factors. Are there possibilities of moving towards a multilateral mediation process, including the selection of a mediation team that goes beyond the region and is more or less multilateral in nature?
Yeah, look, as I said before, number one, ZANU-PF and Emmerson Mnangagwa are not interested in dialogue. And for Emmerson and his colleagues to borrow from a book that Michelle Wong wrote on Kenya, it's their time to eat. It's their time to eat. In the mind of Emmerson, Robert Mugabe was there for 40 years. Let me be there for 40 years. So there's denialism. There's no crisis in Zimbabwe, according to Emmerson. So they'll delay, they'll deny, they'll deflect. So it's going to require a great deal of pressure to force ZANU-PF to understand the inevitability of dialogue. That pressure must come from within Zimbabwe. That pressure must come from outside Zimbabwe, the South African state, the political parties, civic society, as Eleanor made the point brilliantly. So that pressure must come. When we go to dialogue, this dialogue needs to be protected. We need to learn from the mistakes of 2007, 2008, and that the dialogue that gave rise to the GNU. The GNU was a missed opportunity. The GNU sustained the crisis in that it elongated the crisis which could have been ended in 2008 when we reached a crescendo at the time. I don't think we are far off from another apex, from another crescendo. So let us learn from the mistakes of 2008. There were things that were done wrong. 2008 essentially became a ceasefire, agreement to stop the violence and the murders that were taking place in 2008. But this time, we want a sustainable solution that deals holistically to the true essence of the crisis in Zimbabwe. That means that there must be international underwriting. There must be international refereeing. SADC must be there. The African Union must be there. If we can find a mechanism of putting in a civic society, putting in ordinary citizens as part of watchdogs, we are creative enough. There are smart people in South Africa, in SADC, in Zimbabwe. We can do that. That is possible. Secondly, we must know that the focus must not be on some little power sharing position, as was the case in 2008. Let us focus on reform, reform, reform. And I agree with Tony Rila, the crisis is urgent. I think SADC is going to react when there are dead bodies on the streets in their thousands, but the crisis is urgent, trust me. So once we agree on those reforms, we need the implementation mechanism. Last time we erred by allowing those that were that needed reform to become the implementers. I think that was a problem. Let's create an implementation mechanism that will ensure that those that are implementing has no stake in the fight that will follow tomorrow, which is the fight for a free and fair democratic election. So a carefully structured national transitional authority that focuses on delivery, a performance with targets and Gantt charts, in my respectful opinion, will be very key. Then lastly, let's go to an election. Ultimately, the people of Zimbabwe must be allowed to choose the leadership that they want, but on a flattened state, on an equal state, in which the grip of the securocratic force and the nostalgia and the grip of the liberation movement, the exhausted liberation movement, has been loosened. Without that, we are going nowhere. I think that we are not far off to pushing ZANU-PF to accept that there has to be genuine, dialogue. I know that certain key sectors of the state, certain key sections of the military are for this genuine dialogue, because we have 4 generations that have paid a premium of the Zimbabwean crisis. We have 4 generations of children that don't know the inside of a workplace, that think that it's normal to sell vegetables at the Rangin bus station in Bulawayo. It's normal to sell foreign currency in 4th Street. So we need to resolve this as a matter of urgency. Nampla Katesi, it is urgent, it is critical.
Thanks, Tendai. Wanalina, same question. The possibilities for multilateral and the kind of issues that Tendai raised on need for global advocacy. Your last words, Odalina. Now call on Molesi, Eleanor, and Tozi, in that order. Onalina. Your last words. Unmute yourself.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
He's made a very important point that we miss in our focus on dialogue and multiple engagements. The issue of it's time to eat. Our governments are the tables on which food is set, that people want to own that table so that they eat. So how do is it possible to have people eating other than through state power? Is it possible that when we dialogue with countries like China and others, that the state ceases to be the place that people want to take over so that they can eat? Because it seems to me that we can dialogue and still come to the fact that it's a change, people just change chairs. But essentially, it is the state that people want to take over so that they can enrich themselves. We can dialogue, we can have China putting pressure, but where is the food that people want to eat? Can we have multiple tables in the process of that dialoguing so that it's not the one state that has to be captured? Yes, I would go for any dialogue that will involve as many people as possible, but I'd also like to see us offering multiple sources of tables where people can go and eat instead of the state as the sole area that everybody wants to capture.
Thanks, Olena. Thanks very much. It was good to see you again. Molesi, your last words? For today, I mean.
My last word for really, I want to endorse the call that there should be a civil society forum or conference or engagement, obviously with Zimbabweans playing a leadership role there, to map out the demands that will go to BRICS, that will go to the AU, that will go to the United Nations, and all those places. The second thing is we also have to have a pressure. It's not enough just to talk. I remember a meeting with the late Morgan Tsvangirai and some of us, including COSATU, where we asked Morgan, do you want us to shut down Beitbridge in order to show pressure to that we are serious, to show both the South African government and the Zimbabwean government that we mean business? Because a delegation of COSATU had been sent to Zimbabwe and it was deported from Zimbabwe. So we asked, do you want us to close down Beitbridge? And he said no. So there has to be a program of action that the Zimbabweans can live with. But there has to be a program of action. If all we're going to be doing is passing resolutions, well, we will never get anywhere. The ZANU-PF, this has been emphasized today over and again. ZANU-PF is not listening, is not interested in listening. They think they need another 4 years for Mnangagwa to be eating, and that is their agenda. But we have to put pressure on them. The last point I wish to point out is that Zimbabwe is becoming more and more economically marginalized. And that's not good for the people of Zimbabwe. It's not good for the economy of Zimbabwe. At the end of this year, the bridge on Kazangula that bypasses Zimbabwe and links Botswana to Zambia is going to be opened, which means that Zimbabwe will cease being the transit route for the SADC community economic relations. This is something that needs to be managed properly. I'm not saying the bridge shouldn't have been built, but the bridge can quickly destroy the Zimbabwean economy or marginalize the Zimbabwean economy, and that's not. We want more integration of Zimbabwe because that gives us as civil society and the people of Zimbabwe, gives them leverage over the ZANU-PF regime and over the SADC government. So these are why I think the suggestion that civil society must get together and come up with a common, not just program of what we're demanding, but a program of action as well.
Thanks, Moletsi. It's good to see you again. Thanks very much. Hope we see you again. Huh? Eleanor, your last words?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I'm quite cynical about dialogue between politicians, but I recognize that it must happen, and that the thing that helps make it happen is pressure. So I think that civil society focus and pressure on very specific things. And there are things which do succeed. For example, Hopewell Chinono wouldn't be released today if there wasn't pressure. The fact that Tsitsi Dangarembwa won or actually was shortlisted for the Booker Prize 2 days before she was arrested did help in the fact that she was released sooner rather than later. So I think the support for Zimbabweans who are struggling, confronting this regime, while all the dialogue and mediation and whatnot is going on, some of us have to focus on supporting people and putting pressure. And there have been things which have worked in the past, and I think we need to upscale those things. For example, the abductions. I would suggest to you, Ibbo, that this becomes a subject of a specific dialogue where people across the region are invited and where we actually have a strategy specifically on these abductions, because we must stop them happening. We say people's power and people must struggle. In order to help them in that, in the process of struggle, we have to put pressure on this regime to ensure that the cost of human rights violations are driven up as high as possible.
Thanks, Eleanor. Your point is taken. That's the next dialogue. So you'll be back here in 2 weeks' time. Thanks very much. Tozi, are you still there? Last but not least.
Well, I agree with everybody who has said that we need some form of dialogue. That dialogue, in my view, should be guided by the people of Zimbabwe. They must give us the agenda of what we are supposed to do. They must lead. And whether those people of Zimbabwe are inside and outside or outside of Zimbabwe, then mobilize the region around the issues that we want to campaign. Like the example that Eleanor is making, we've got to identify specific issues around which we should mobilize the civil society organizations. Unfortunately, outsiders can't tell Zimbabweans what to do. I'm like others, I am also cynical about leaving this on a state-to-state basis. You can't avoid the state participating. At some point, the states are going to have to participate. But there has to be pressure on those states to marshal them towards the objectives that we have identified, or the people of Zimbabwe have identified. So give us an agenda. Let us all work together, sit down and work out that agenda that we can all buy into as the region, as the countries of the region, and South Africa has a critical role to play, because a lot of Zimbabweans are there, and we must work with them to create this viable civil society organization. Because if Zimbabweans who are in South Africa are pushed back to South Africa, to Zimbabwe without jobs, they're in a state of crisis. We will too be in a crisis. We don't want a Zimbabwe economy collapsing, if we can, but of course we want that to happen within a democratic state that respects human rights for its citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, Tozi. Thanks, and again, very good. Nice to see you again. Thanks to you all of to Tozi, Tendai, Eleanor, Moeletsi, and Onelina. Thank you very much. There's no need to summarize. I think all of you, the four of you, have summarized this very well, except to highlight again the points made by Biti, Tendai Biti, namely the need, one, the agency of Zimbabweans, the national situation. To what extent, as the state began to acknowledge that the house is on fire, it appears it has not yet acknowledged that, and it's a pity that it has to require much more action on the part of the Zimbabwean population in terms of protest, peaceful, in terms of constitutional, staying within the constitutional ambit of the law, in terms of putting pressure on the state. The second, of course, that the global agency, global advocacy must continue. And I think we, through such fora as we have been able to sustain a level of engagement with the international community, the region. But certainly tonight, I think we have had very strong voices from persons who have been involved with civic society, especially Tozi, Eleanor, Moeletsi, Onelina herself, but also Tendai Biti, who has been on the cutting edge of the struggle in Zimbabwe. So on that note, I would like to say that, well, we have looked at the issue of mediation. It appears there isn't much of mediation taking place. There appears to be engagement. We are still far from putting in place precisely what it is that should take place between now and what we are calling a national a comprehensive national settlement in Zimbabwe. What kind of mediation should it take? The need for multilateralism, the need to involve SADC, for South Africa to involve SADC, AU, and indeed even BRICS and the international community in ensuring that we get to a systematic and programmed discussion on the crisis in Zimbabwe. So thank you. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks' time when, as recommended by Eleanor, we look at the issue of violence, abductions, rape, that has become a menace, a scourge in Zimbabwe. Thank you and good night.
She bad, she bad, she bad. She doing it as easy as that. She give me the real pleasure touch, will make me react as easy as that. Can't figure out how you simply just please me with that. As easy as that. She bad, she bad, she bad. She doing it as easy as that. She give me the real pleasure touch, will make me react as easy as that. Can't figure out how you simply just please me with that. As easy as that. She bad, she bad, she bad. She doing it as easy as that. She give me the real pleasure touch, will make me react as easy as that. Can't figure out how you simply just please me with that. As easy as that. She bad, she bad, she bad. She doing it as easy as that. She give me the real pleasure touch, will make me react as easy as that. Can't figure out how you simply just please me with that. As easy as that. She bad, she bad, she bad. She doing it as easy as that. She give me the real pleasure touch, will make me react as easy as that. Can't figure out how you simply just please me with that. As easy as that.
Sometimes in life, moments confront us when we feel we have come to the end of the rope. Moments when we are so deep in our problems and we feel like all hope is gone. Moments when you weep and you look for help and help seems so remote. In the Bible, Hezekiah faced such situation and he felt he had gone to the last bit of his life, and God had sent Isaiah to tell him to put his house in order. And Hezekiah turned to the wall and prayed, and God answered his prayer. The title of this song is called Munopindura Minamato. God hears prayer, God answers prayer. It doesn't matter what you are going through in life, it doesn't matter what life presents to you, but when you call on the name of the Lord, God hears prayer and God answers prayer. So I urge us to continue to call on the name of the Lord, because the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and they are safe. Let us call on the name of the Lord no matter what situations we are going through. God bless.
At SlyMedia Productions, we offer live streaming services to companies willing to reach a worldwide audience. We have the capacity to live stream debates from various locations for a wide range of clients.
And our online audience, we welcome you back.
We follow them and help build Zimbabwe brand on a positive note.
On the second report on citizens' perceptions.
And for us, our interest has always been around how do we leverage technology to communicate policy, to communicate public issues.
When you think of reaching the ever-growing internet audience with your video adverts, think SlyMedia TV Online. If you want to pre-package TV programs, documentaries, weddings and church services, think SlyMedia Productions, building bridges. Your TV on the go, anytime, anywhere, worldwide. At SlyMedia Productions, we offer live